Dr. Joyce Kimutai, good morning.
Good morning.
Karibu sana. This is where we fix the nation.
Yeah.
One conversation at a time.
Yes.
Like our next conversation.
Yeah.
It's actually very interesting to have a climate scientist. What's a climate scientist, Dr. Kimutai?
Yeah, I mean, first, let me just say, like, really thank you so much for having me here today. It's really such a pleasure. And I think, as you say, I don't think many of us come here. People like me come here.
No.
And I think there's a great opportunity because part of what I do is actually to make sure that the research that I do, what I do, gets to the people. And so I see these as a very critical, crucial platform to actually speak and engage with the public on what I do, what that means for them, and how they can engage with that and use that information. So just to answer your question is, what's a climate scientist? This is someone or a professional that tries to understand the climate, like what is happening in the sort of the space around us. How are we interacting with sort of the environment and all that? So you're trying to understand what are the patterns, what are the factors, what are influencing sort of the air around us. So it's just basically understanding the atmosphere and how it interacts with humans, with the natural systems.
Okay.
What's the difference between climate and weather?
So climate is sort of understanding the changes in the system in a longer period. But weather is more of a day-to-day. It's more of the sort of what happens tomorrow, what happens next week, what happens 2 weeks from now. But climate, you're sort of looking at a long-term sort of changes and understanding and trying to see what does that mean. So what is typically sort of the temperature for this region, or what is the rainfall pattern for a particular locality or a region or stuff like that. So like sort of you're taking a very long-term understanding or a long, sort of a long snapshot of that interaction.
Okay. Yesterday, at about 7:17 a.m., the Kenya Met Department, through the X-handle Meteo Kenya, gave us the weather outlook for the next 10 days, 4th to 10th of March. Is that 10 days? Well, it's 7 days.
Yeah.
It's a week.
Yeah.
Dry conditions likely to end as rain is coming! Exclamation mark, ding! And then there's a sun emoji and there's a rain emoji.
Alarm bells.
Alarm, alarm. They say, mostly sunny and dry and hot across the country. Occasional rainfall expected later in the week over Western Kenya, Lake Victoria Basin, Rift Valley, Central Kenya, inclusive of Nairobi, coast, southeast lowlands and parts of the north. Daytime temperatures to exceed 30 degrees centigrade in most areas. It's been hot.
It has been
very hot.
excessively.
But cooler in Central Kenya highlands and the Rift Valley. Nighttime temperatures to dip below 10 degrees centigrade in highlands east of the Rift Valley and Mount Kilimanjaro region. Stay safe and stay updated. And Kenya Met also gives all these places where you can get all this information. meteo.go.ke. You can join their WhatsApp channel. You can download the Faster Ken app. They also have an app. And basically what they've said is, yesterday was 4th. Between yesterday and the 10th, Joto, then rain.
Dip
Yeah.
rain.
Right?
Yes.
Hey. Now, the reason why this is alarming is because, like we introduced earlier, we had a similar kind of situation last year where the weatherman told us expect heavy rainfall. It's been hot. We have had drought for a long time, but expect heavy rainfall, and it's going to, you need to be prepared. Were we prepared? Were we not? We had 267 people dead by mid-May.
Yeah.
We had 75 people missing by mid-May.
Yeah.
281,835 people displaced by mid-May.
Yeah.
And almost 76,000 families affected by the persistent rains. Livestock, more than 9,900 livestock lost, 41,000 acres of cropland, 61 roads damaged, 886 businesses, 1,967 schools, 1,465 water sources, 62 health facilities damaged in 11 out of 42 counties affected by the floods. Nairobi, Kisumu, Tana River, Garissa, Mandera were extremely affected. That's just spans the country.
Yeah.
We were caught as if we were unawares, and we lost people
Yeah.
and our livelihoods. This time, Daktari, shall we be caught again?
We really hope not. And this is what we're doing as Kenya Met. So as you've seen very clearly that we have this advisories already on the very many platforms. So what we're doing basically is like we're trying to make the information as accessible as possible, like put it out there. But I think one thing that I want to say even before getting into that is we have more of like a centralized way of doing things, and then we've decentralized it as well. So first of all, we sit as an institution and generate the forecasts. And then we take those forecasts to the counties to say, what does that mean for a particular county? So we normally have like county meetings or sessions or workshops. We call them participatory planning. So where we call different stakeholders, we sit with them, we try as much as possible to co-produce the information, which is very critical for this kind of activities. So in that case, you're calling the different sectors, and especially the very like sensitive, climate sensitive sectors or weather sensitive sectors, and you say, we have this information, this is what it says about your county. So for example, you're saying, in the Lake region, for example, we're expecting above normal. First, you start unpacking that and saying what is above normal for that region. You say, maybe, and that is now, when you ask me about the climate and the weather, the climate tells you, like, what is the normal rainfall for this region? So you've looked at that region for a long time, and you sort of have the millimeters or the quantities or the values that calls a normal. So you say to them, for example, that for the Lake region, or for this particular station or locality in that county, it's normally maybe 120 millimeters, just roughly giving a figure. Then you're saying to them, for example, above normal would mean you will get more than that, right? And there could be days that you can get 200. There could be days that you get 300. There could be days that it can even come below that. But you're saying when we say a season will be above normal, we are saying most days of that season or the distribution of rainfall in space and time in that locality would be more than normal. So that's the information, and you tell them fast. And so, and then after that, you say, what does that mean for the activities that you're engaged in, for the sector that you're part of? So whether someone is in the livestock sector, whether it's just a small older farmer in Kisumu, whether it's a mama mboga in Kisumu, whether it's someone running water resources or managing water resources in the county, what does that mean for that region? So that is what we try to do with the different counties. So we take that information down there. And the reason why we do all this is really just to answer the question that you're saying, are we prepared? Will we be caught unawares this time? So we try as much as possible to have that information with the people. And just to say as well that it's not only Kenya Met that can do this or does this. It's really has to be like a multi-agency coordination or an initiative or an activity. Sort of you're trying to involve the different agencies, whether it's even the Red Cross who are like involved in like response and such kind of activities.
I'm almost willing to bet that people in different regions, especially those who stayed there, can begin to see when weather patterns are shifting.
Yeah.
If you've lived somewhere, if you've grown up, you can see the pattern. So where is the gap then between your expertise, you collaborating with the community, and then what then happens in terms of, El Nino happens, disaster response? Where do you think the gap is in getting everyone on the same page to then be proactive about mitigating anything that's extreme?
Yeah, I think they could. Yeah, that's a very good question, and I really want to address this question using. So when you talk about an early warning system, you're talking about 4 pillars, and I think, just to answer your question, it could mean that there's a link that is missing in these 4 pillars. So one of these pillars is risk awareness or risk knowledge. So you're trying to understand who is actually at risk. Who is the person? So you're sort of mapping the community and trying to understand who lives in this community. Who are the people? Who lives where? How vulnerable are they? How exposed are they? Right? So that's the first thing. So you want to understand risk. So who is at risk? and what is the kind of risks that exist in that locality. So that's the first thing. The second thing, you now go to the sort of the monitoring and the forecasting and sort of the observation. So that is what Kenya Met does, for example. We generate the forecast, we generate the warnings themselves, we look at the data and we try to look at what would a season look like in terms of weather, so the rain, the temperatures, the you know, all that. And then the third thing now, it comes to sort of the dissemination. All right, so communication, so early warning dissemination or warning dissemination or just communication of the information. And then you go to the fourth pillar, which is on the response, right? So it's the preparedness and the response. So if these four pillars are not working together, and it has to be cohesive and it has to be concerted and they have to be speaking to each other. And it has to be sort of there should be like a feedback loop. So the response people need to go back to it. So you look at the risk, you understand the risk, you give the data, generate the data, you disseminate the data, and then people use the data to make decisions and plan better. So if there's a link that is missing there, then you get the problem that we experience.
Which link is missing there, in your opinion?
I think sometimes it could be. So there's no particular link that misses every time. You get what I mean? I'm not going to say like there's an issue with dissemination or there's an issue with preparedness. But I think in most cases, what normally happens is that if you don't have all these pillars speaking to each other, it becomes a problem. So say, for example, KMD puts out the information. And then the channels for dissemination are not proper, right? They don't get to the people. People in Mandera, for example, you're using internet platforms to speak to them, so it doesn't get to them, right? So you have to say what gets to the people. You have to understand what are the kind of the dissemination platforms that really work for the people. Do you want to use barazas, for example? Do you want to like even churches? Yeah. Even like burials? So you must understand who lives. That's why I said you start with assessing the risk and understanding who is at risk. And even with that assessment of risk, you're sort of getting the information of who is where and how can I speak to them. And so just to say that, so when you have the information and it doesn't get to the people at the right time, in the right way, then that link is broken, right? So it means what happens to the link, what happens to the tail end of that chain, which is the response. It's completely broken. It doesn't exist.
Okay, that's what could have happened last year?
That could have happened last year, for example. Yeah. Okay,
because it felt like the El Nino just caught everyone off guard. We heard about it in the 90s, and you're like, it's happening again.
Even when we were told there's an El Nino coming, it's like, so what is?
Yeah, so what do we do?
What do we do? That's a good one. Like, so what do you do with that information?
Who plays what role in these four pillars? Right? Because I can see the science in the monitoring, observation, forecasting.
Yeah.
I can also see the science in the dissemination and communication.
Yeah.
But then there are other people who you must collaborate with.
Yeah.
In the response, science will play a part, but then there are also now others who will have to collaborate with.
Yeah.
Who plays the critical roles in each of these?
Yeah.
Who must be in the room at each of these pillars?
Yeah. I think you've had me use words like concerted effort, like interagency coordination. Like I was just basically trying to say that this is not something that's for one institution or one particular group of people or experts. This is when you're building an effective early warning system, you have to engage all the necessary and crucial sort of organizations, community-based organizations. It could be government organizations, but different agencies, different stakeholders bringing them together. I'll give you an example. For, say, preparedness, you just don't want to like leave it to Red Cross to like respond to disasters and evacuate people from flood-prone regions, right? Yeah. You want to sensitize the community as well to know. You want to engage community-based organizations, people at the grassroots, small organizations that exist there that work with people on day-to-day, even on like on femicide or other issues. It doesn't have to be like climate things, but you just want to look at organizations or structures or activities or engagements that exist in a community level where you can actually bring people together to sort of say, let's do this jointly. There's this information. So first, there's this information, but how can we do this together? So you're sort of saying we don't have to wait for an outsider to come, but it should start with us. An example is people living in more of like regions that are maybe even Nairobi's informal settlements, for example. That was a big issue last year, actually, with the flooding. They should understand that you can't have, you can't be throwing litter everywhere and having drainages that are clogged everywhere, because that is very dangerous. The waterways are clogged. It means there's nowhere water will pass. It will flood. Water will find its way, and what means it will flood in their homes. How is their roofing at that particular time? Do they need to repair it? So like sort of having this engagements that is not just a particular organization waiting for a particular organization or the government to come, but also saying, how can we do this?
How can we be proactive?
Yes.
As communities as well.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. It's 28 minutes to 9. Our guest this morning is Dr. Joyce Kimutai. She's a climate scientist at the Kenya Meteorological Department. Yeah, we have scientists at Kenya Met. Now that's the other thing that you have to address. Public perception about Kenya Met. Okay? Climate is what we expect, weather is what we get. Janet,
Yeah.
who said that?
Who said that? Mark Twain. But I'll double check. I will double check. Peter Otieno, we'll see whether you're right. Probably is, but yes.
Yes,
That's a good one.
He's quoted
He's
this.
quoted.
We'll be back shortly. Lest we forget, last year rains came and rains left floods that left deaths. Are we prepared? The weatherman is telling us this year, expect heavy rain in these months of March, April, May. Are we ready? Lest we forget, we'll be back shortly.
I've just realized that climate is what we expect, weather is what we get, is often attributed to Mark Twain. No definitive evidence that he actually said or wrote it, which goes for a lot of... So sometimes when I come here with who said that, and Eric says, unleash evidence. If I say... if I say it's often attributed, that is also valid.
With quotes, honestly,
Yes.
finding out who said it first is nearly
It's
impossible.
tricky, but still such a great quote for this conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. The Kenya Met Service, Dr. Ari, as we
Yeah.
continue, even as you have a conversation today and say, Met has told us that it's going to rain. Met, they never tell us anything. First, there are people who are not aware that you actually communicate on so many platforms. You have a WhatsApp channel, you have a website, you have an X handle that communicates on a daily basis. And then even after you communicate, the people were like, they never told us anything.
Yeah.
How do you respond to all those perceptions?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I've answered this question so many times. I have so many versions.
That you have a boilerplate of an answer.
I mean, let me just say, if I look at 5 years ago, that narrative, if I look at that narrative now and 5 years ago, it's changed dramatically. And it's because, number one, there's been a bit of literacy and sort of like mainstreaming climate information the way we're doing here. We're speaking about this. Because when I joined the Met Service, it was about people only knew Gota Francis. Right? Even before that, when I did my undergrad, because I did meteorology for my undergrad, people would be like, "Wow,
What?
what's Joyce? You're wasting your time?" They felt like, but I think it was just about like the awareness, the understanding. Meteorology is a very distant field. Or like understanding weather patterns, or the science of understanding weather patterns is very distant from us. I think we've lived in a society where we've just been just experiencing weather without having to like plan for it or stuff like that. And I think it's largely been contributed by the positioning of where we are, right? So we're in the tropics where there's not so much that change, even in terms of the temperatures and stuff like that. Right. Because in the extratropics, if you go to the north, for example, or to the south, you really have to plan for this. There's winter, there's spring, there's autumn, there's summer. You have to plan for this. So for them, it's always been in their culture and their system to understand the weather and climate. So it's part of it's in the school curriculum, for example. Kids are told about this, but even without that, kids understand that, it's going to be dry tomorrow, it's going to be rainy tomorrow, they're going to be snow in the mountains tomorrow. So it's the information that I've lived with and they've been part of it. So coming home, I'm sort of addressing that question is that it's really just about that awareness that has been low, right? People not interacting with us in the way that it should be. People not using our information to make decisions, because that is how you sort of critique a system and you improve the system, right? But if you walk in silos and isolation where we just provide our information, and then there's the public over there, or like some people interact with this information the way they want it, some don't, some it doesn't matter, that some they don't use it. So it sort of doesn't, it sort of taints the perception of the awareness that exists out there. But I think a lot has changed now, because of course, it's sad to say thanks to climate change, but I could say that with the warming of the planet, the patterns have been very erratic. People have been experiencing like the floods, the droughts, and all that, and they've been asking questions or saying, "Hey, what's happening? Maybe it's really the time that I need to know and use this information." Even a small older farmer, like I've been speaking a lot with small older farmers in some of the projects that I've been involved in, and they'll be like, now than ever, I need climate information, because I just don't want to prepare my land to put my seeds down when I don't know what the season will be. When is it going to rain? Because they've seen that there's the value and the benefit in using climate information, right? Otherwise, you can have losses. So there's benefits, there's return in investment when you use climate information. So they've started to understand that. So it's about the awareness, it's also about the usefulness of the information, and it's about mainstreaming climate information the way we're doing here, speaking to the people and engaging.
Yeah, some people say, and you just said it actually, I was going to ask, climate is having a moment. Climate justice, climate change, and for the longest time it was really kind of seen as a very technical, almost, I always use the word exclusionary conversation. And I think that's why people just said, oh, it's that thing that they discuss in COP. We'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
What's the one thing we should all be really worried about collectively, about how much climate is shifting, especially like we've come home to Kenya? What's the one thing everybody needs to know about climate change and bring it home to Kenya? Yeah,
I can say the one thing is that the future is not good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for sure, in terms of weather and climate. And I'll tell you why. We've had this collective goal as a planet to keep warming below 1.5. It's a global average. Yeah. So, of course, what has happened is since 1850s, we've industrialized. So the massive industrial revolution that has happened over the past almost 2 centuries has really caused the warming of our planet. So because in those activities where, of course, we were trying to make things easier and better for us, we're trying to feed more people, so agricultural revolution for it, yeah? And then we're trying to move easily, transport goods and services easily. So we really sort of revolutionized the way we move and access goods and services. But the consequence of that, and it was very unintended, is that we've tremendously warmed our planet because we're emitting fossil fuels that goes into the atmosphere and it traps the heat and warms the planet. So that has happened since 1850s, and it's mostly the very industrialized countries that have been responsible for this. And so what has happened is, and this is what we speak a lot at the COP, is that we have to come together as a globe to stop doing this and retain the warming to 1. So it's 1.5 relative to that period. Because if we warm above, it's going to have like dangerous impacts in both human and natural systems. So what I tell you, do you know last year we breached it? We breached, so we did 1.54. So we still can't say we've surpassed that goal, or we've broken the goal completely, because it's normally a decadal average, so it's a 10-year average. So you need to breach it for 10 years consecutively. But I'll tell you for sure that when I say it's not the future is bleak, is dark, is in January we've had the hottest January ever.
This year?
This year. In Kenya?
In Kenya, in the world.
In the world. Hottest January ever. Like since the historical records. So what it says is that we are continually warming the planet, and what that has done is it's disrupted weather patterns. So that's why we see a lot of this heat
that we experience, the heat that we're experiencing at the moment. Also saying that there will be this very short and intense rainfall in the season. So what has happened to our season, this March, April, May season, is that as much as the season might be relatively, it's actually very confusing, and I want to talk about this a little bit with the public today, is that we might have a season where, if you look at it like in space and time, the distribution of rainfall might not be that much. But then you'll have these very intense episodes, like 1 or 2 days that rains heavily. And that is really a feature of the changing climate. That is what it's doing that is what the disruption of the climate system is doing to the weather patterns. So either you can have like extended dry periods, and then you have this very intense rainfall that comes. And the problem with that is it's not the kind of rainfall that is useful for agriculture. Because you don't want your seeds to be swept out, right? You don't want a flash flood coming on your farm. That's not useful at all. You want a little bit of evenly distribution of rainfall in the space there and the time. And that is also not useful for infrastructure that is not prepared for that. So when you have roads or bridges that have not withstand that kind of, I'll give you an example. So last year in Spain, it actually rained 300 millimeters in one single day. I mean, let me put it in perspective. In perspective. I'm trying to put it in perspective because it might not make sense for someone who doesn't understand. I mean, for me, I know what it means, but let me put it in perspective. You are having a dam that could accommodate, that could normally have water at halfway. That's the standard. That's you have it. But then there's this rain that fills it, so it's half. And overflows.
In one day.
In one single day.
In 24 hours.
In 24 hours. So that is sort of the kind of like weather patterns that we're experiencing in the world now. It's not just Kenya, it's everywhere in the planet. So you're having this very, the atmosphere dumping a lot of water in a very short period of time. And then also you're having these droughts that are extending for a long period of time. So
how do we future-proof? How do we climate-proof? Because my usual worry is, from our end, we could do a lot of things to get ourselves more prepared. From a climate change perspective, though, I feel like there's 2 big countries that can really do the necessary, right? And that's outside of our control. So given that we are likely to bear the brunt, how do we climate-proof ourselves, if it's possible at all? Or at least mitigate?
So we need to adapt to the changes. It's like you are saying that we are here. We found ourselves here. We're in a mess, right? We're in a crisis. But then how do we adapt to that? So you're sort of saying, how do we prepare our systems to be resilient to that change? How do we make sure that we have bridges that actually can accommodate this kind of rainfall happening? Because it would happen. It will happen.
It's an inevitable
thing. So how do you prepare for that? How do you make communities resilient to these changes?
Can you? We have a question. That's a very interesting question of how do you make communities resilient? Because sometimes they were just sitting, doing what they do best, and then they were affected. What does the act that forms Kenya Met say about their mandate and scope of responsibility? So scope of responsibility, again, going back to how we opened the show, because we're really trying to focus on the rains that are coming, mitigation, but you're also reflecting on the countless losses, damage that occurred last year as a result of the heavy floods. So in terms of mandate and scope of responsibility for Kenya Met with regards to a lot of these happenings, what does that look like?
Are you just like, a department that tells us, it'll rain?
And
then, shauri yako, if you can buy an umbrella or not, or does your mandate extend beyond that?
Our mandate doesn't extend so much beyond those territories because we are a Met office, we are more of a technical institution. So what sits squarely in our mandate is to prepare the information, to analyze, prepare information, and put it out there. But what we do and what we've continuously do in the recent past is to engage proactively with other agencies, other organizations. So Disaster Management Authority, for example, Kenya Red Cross, for example, NDMA, for example, when we have droughts. So we have sort of this interagency coordination, and KMD has been sort of the central to this coordination and bringing them. So basically KMD say, there's a lot that we can do by ourselves, everything. I mean, there's a lot that we can do by ourselves, but we really need other people to come in, and it's critical to bring these people together.
Do you have legal mandate and powers to convene these stakeholders? Like you say, if I call for a meeting, you National Drought Management Authority, you county governments, you must come. And when you come, if we say that this is what we have shared and these are the things that you need to do, then you must do them. Do you have mandate, or are you just an advisory? They can take your opinion, it's a scientific opinion, they can choose to consume or not.
Yeah. I don't think we can say you must do this. I don't think we have that mandate. I think we're just sort of supporting you, giving them the information so that they can make like science or informed decisions. And we're sort of making them understand why it's actually important for them to make those decisions using this information.
What's global practice? Do other med departments in the world have more powers beyond what you have here in Kenya?
I have been to a lot of Met offices and I've engaged with a lot of meteorologists in the planet, but I do not see them having that mandate. But what I see is that having sort of a mechanism that brings these actors together, it sort of almost forces you guys to work together, because you find that for actors that are not actually they're not taking action using the information, they could be liable. I've seen that in other countries. So say, for example, if Disaster Preparedness Office have resources or have been allocated resources to deal with drought, and there's this information that KMD gave on time, or the Met Office in that country gave on time, if they don't act on that, they can actually be taken court based on that. So I've seen that happen in other regions, and I think that has been useful. But there's a lot of also public engagement and actively being part of the conversation, saying, I think you're not making good use of our taxes or resources because you didn't use this information the way you should have used it.
And county governments had this information last year, did they not? They had. I mean, for all you know, they had this information prior.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, we put up the information the way we've done now. I mean, this is public information. I'm not in this show to release the forecast. The forecast is publicly available. Everyone can access it. Our Twitter handles are there. Even if you Google just www.mete.go.ke, you will find everything.
And they had the resources. It was just a lack of understanding the gravity of it, because, you know, I think there was people who said or spoke to resources being allocated, and yet there was just like we were caught flat-footed. Or let's react. Let's send out boats. Let's say prayers to you guys who've lost you know what I mean? And I just remember thinking, I'm pretty sure they were aware, pretty sure they were resourced.
Yeah.
Now who can issue?
Actually, I remember there were meetings that had started taking place before the onset of the rains, right? That brought together all these, being coordinated by the Deputy President's Office, and brought together all these, the counties and the state agencies to start talking about the El Nino rains that were coming. The unfortunate bit of the presidential speech on a Sunday morning saying, hiyo kitu tumeongelesha God, I come. That could have affected, and but counties and the national government had started having meetings, and the Red Cross, because we spoke to Red Cross more than once, was saying, yes, we are part of a coordination mechanism. We have come from drought, so we're already together working on drought and drought response, and now we are working together on mitigation or preparedness for the floods. The level of preparedness is now where the questions come in.
Right.
So what did you do with the information that you had? How much did you actually put on ground with the information that you had? Remember Sakaja saying, we are setting aside a budget, this is what we are looking at, the things that we may need to get boats, and people are laughing, boats in Nairobi, right? And then we saw actually, we may have needed
we could use a boat, yeah.
So I think it's that mechanism that you're saying. If the information has been shared, and it's clear that these entities have the information, then coming back to Parliament and the others to see how you're oversighting that they are doing what they're supposed to do to save people's lives. Right now, have you had any county saying, we are preparing because the Met has told us heavy rains are coming?
Good question.
That's a good question.
That's a good question.
That's a good question. And I mean, I hope we can have such a mechanism. That'll be very useful. Because, and especially because we're talking about people's lives, right? Property. Destruction of property. What I mean, the statistic that you gave us at the start of the show, these are not things to like joke about. Like these are massive destructions and loss of property and lives. So I think we should have a mechanism as a country. I mean, this is not. I mean, this is a very personal. It's not a KMD, but I just think we should have a mechanism in a country where we actually ensure and enforce sort of that coordination and make sure that everyone does and plays their own role and does their part.
Very two quick pieces of feedback, because I know we need to wind up soon. Nons1024 says, perhaps our Met department needs to do some basic on-ground education from the larger counties to the crevices of the country. Also, the cutting down of our trees in major forests, they ask with a question mark. The other thing they say is encourage our younger and general interested generation to study risk and disaster reduction through education and partnerships around the world. But it's truly a multidisciplinary response, which is to what you said. And I think you've also spoken to on-ground education and speaking to it. But any sort of sentence you can share with regards to cutting down of trees in major forests and how that affects them.
Yeah, so just to touch on the on-ground stuff, I think we are now also working with like sort of the education sector, people involved in learning, to make sure that this is part of the curriculum as well. So we want to have a new generation of people who understand climate, environment, important to take care of the environment, people who don't throw rubbish off the car windows to the streets, right? People who just don't litter haphazardly, right? We want a generation that is different. And
counties that give us dustbins.
Also.
So that we don't litter.
I agree.
I always push back on that. Whenever I say it, don't litter, where are the dustbins? Anyway, but you're making a very good point.
No, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with the bins, actually, that are very important, because someone will say, but how far should I carry this litter? You know, like they can't find somewhere to dispose.
A good example is like downtown, quote unquote, Nairobi. When you go like Moi Avenue downwards, it's so hard to find a bin. Right. But on this side, it's much easier and it's cleaner.
Even this side, go across the entire stretch of Kimathi Street. Show me the number of dustbins you'll find. This is this side, right? Go up Kenyatta Avenue, all the way.
I know of one outside
Serena.
Nation Center. Beyond that,
I think we should have this bin conversation more.
Right.
And I mean, it's very it's really critical. It's really important, because I think that is where the mess starts as well. And especially with the rains now, if you're gonna have litter everywhere in the streets, and you know the way we've paved, so like Upper Hill, most of Kilimani and these other regions are heavily paved at the moment. So it means the water can't percolate, right? We don't have more of like green spaces where it can retain the water. So what happens? It's mainly runoff, and it's going to the drainages. And if all these drainages
are clogged,
and also if there's all this litter that is being swept by the water to that same drain, I mean, you can imagine what happens. So I think that binning conversation should happen more. So on cutting of trees, so it has a lot of, I can say trees is like, it can solve a lot of problems, trees, for example, are windbreakers. Trees help, especially like even with the flooding, you can't have like flash flooding, it retains the water. The other thing is, if you clear the land, it means that you don't have so what trees do is they create sort of what we call a microclimate. So they create a climate that is very localized, that sort of supports that, you know, there's land atmosphere interaction. So there's the air above us and the land. So the trees provide that a very conducive interaction that sort of supports the ecosystem there. So when you cut trees, number one is that you are actually making sure you're messing with the ecosystem. You're messing with the weather of that place. You're messing with how organisms sort of coexist in that environment. But at the same time, you are When there's heavy rain, it means there'll be a lot of degradation of the land because there's a lot of sweeping of the land.
Yeah.
So trees, they do a lot of good to us.
Okay.
Dr. Joyce Kimutai, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Kimutai is a climate scientist with the Kenya Meteorological Department. Lest we forget, last year the rains came with floods. They left death and devastation. The Met Department has said, expect heavy rains from next week. Are county governments prepared? Is the national government prepared? Are you in your community prepared for these rains?